all my life I gave, my love, my money, my dreams, so my daughter could have everything I never did. I worked until my hands ached, until my back screamed, telling myself it was worth it, because one day she would see. But on the eve of her wedding, I was told I wasn't welcome. It's better for appearances, they said, as if decades of sacrifice could be erased by the price of a champagne bottle. That night, I stood in my tiny kitchen, holding the one heirloom left from my parents, and I made a choice. They thought they could silence me, erase me, but I would be there, whether they liked it or not. And in that moment, I knew. They had underestimated a mother's resolve. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of my small apartment, painting the kitchen in soft gold. It was the kind of light that made dust motes look like they were suspended in time, just drifting, waiting. I stood by the counter, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, staring at the steam curling upward. At 68, mornings like this had become my quiet refuge. No alarms, no call times, no makeup chair buzzing with chatter. Just me, the hum of the refrigerator, and the weight of years pressing against my shoulders. Once, long ago, my mornings had been very different. I'd woken to the call of producers and the hum of cameras warming up, to racks of costumes and pages of dialogue I'd stayed up late memorizing. I'd been Margaret Hayes, a familiar face on living room screens across the country, an actress who brought characters to life in weekly television dramas. There had been fan letters stacked high on the dressing room table, bouquets after premieres, and a time when strangers stopped me on the street just to tell me they loved my work. But those days dissolved the moment I held Lily in my arms for the first time. Her tiny fingers had curled around mine, fragile yet fierce, and I knew instantly that my life had changed forever. My husband Daniel had smiled through exhausted tears, already dreaming aloud about the woman she would become. We didn't know then that he wouldn't live to see her turn 8. The years after his passing blurred into a relentless rhythm. Work, bills, school meetings, more work. Acting couldn't guarantee a steady paycheck, and auditions didn't care if your child had a fever. So, I traded sets for a uniform, black slacks, white shirt, a vest with just enough shine to look respectable. Bella Luna Cafe became my stage, the clink of glasses my applause. I learned how to balance 6 plates at once, how to smile through aching feet, how to remember regular customers' orders before they spoke. 25 years passed that way, me serving tables while serving the future I wanted for Lily. Every double shift meant tuition money. Every holiday I worked meant she could have gifts under the tree. She never knew the numbers behind those sacrifices. I never wanted her to. Her joy was payment enough. Now, in the corner of my living room, an old cedar chest held the relics of the life I'd once had. A stack of scripts with my name in bold letters, a silk scarf from a costume department that swore I could keep it, photographs of me smiling under bright studio lights. I opened it that morning, as I sometimes did when I needed reminding that my life had held more than one chapter. The scent of cedar mixed with the faint trace of perfume that had clung to my wardrobe back then. I picked up a black and white photo from my very first starring role. My hair was swept back, my eyes filled with that reckless optimism only youth can carry. I wondered what she, the younger me, would think if she saw the lines etched into my face now, the calluses on my hands. Would she see failure? Or would she understand that sometimes love demands you put down the spotlight to carry something far more precious? The kettle on the stove whistled softly, but I didn't move right away. My gaze lingered on a small framed picture sitting atop the chest. Lily on her graduation day, cap slightly askew, smile wide enough to light the world. I'd been in the back row of the audience that day, wearing my plainest clothes, not wanting to draw attention. I'd clapped until my hands stung, thinking that if Daniel could see her, he'd know we'd done right by her. I sipped my coffee and glanced at the gift box on the table. Inside, nestled in blue velvet, was my father's gold pocket watch. He'd carried it through decades of longshoreman shifts, its steady ticking a comfort during hard times. When he passed it to me, he'd said, "This isn't just to tell time, Maggie. It's to remind you of who you are when the world tries to tell you otherwise." I'd always imagined giving it to Lily on her wedding day as a piece of the family she could carry forward. That day was coming soon. Invitations had gone out, dresses chosen, venues booked. My role in it all was small, but I was content with that. I'd be there, sitting quietly among the guests, watching her step into the life she'd built. That thought alone had been enough to carry me through the early mornings and the sore joints. But as I ran my hand over the smooth wood of the gift box, I felt a strange unease. Maybe it was the way Lily had sounded distracted on the phone lately, her calls rushed, her laughter thinner than usual. Or maybe it was the memory of the last family dinner, where her fiancé, Nathan Collins, had spent more time checking his watch than engaging in conversation. I brushed the thought aside. Today wasn't the day for doubts. Today was for remembering what had been given, what had been built, and what was about to be celebrated. I closed the cedar chest, letting the lock click shut. Whatever the next chapter held, I reminded myself, I had lived fully in each role I'd been given. Actress, wife, mother, provider. And though the world might only see the uniform and the tray in my hand now, I knew the truth. Every part had been worth playing for her. The gift box sat open on the kitchen table, the gold pocket watch catching stray shafts of sunlight. I had just polished it until it gleamed, the way my father always had before tucking it into his vest. Wrapping paper lay neatly to the side, scissors poised, ribbon waiting. My fingers lingered on the watch's cool surface, feeling the faint pulse of its ticking, like a heartbeat linking past to present. The phone rang, breaking the stillness. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach tighten. Nathan Collins. My future son-in-law's voice came through crisp and measured, the kind of tone that could slice through warmth if you weren't careful. "Margaret," he said, skipping any pleasantries, "I just wanted to touch base before the wedding." "Yes, Nathan?" I tried to keep my voice light. There was a pause, as though he were weighing each word for maximum impact. "I trust you'll dress appropriately for the occasion. It's going to be a very elegant event, high-profile guests. I wouldn't want you to feel out of place." I could hear the unspoken words as clearly as if he'd said them. "Don't embarrass us." My gaze dropped to my own reflection in the polished surface of the watch. Lined face, hair streaked silver, hands worn from decades of labor. For a moment, I almost laughed. Once, designers had dressed me in silk and sequins. Now, my best clothes were a well-pressed blouse and a skirt that had seen more holidays than I could count. "I'll be fine," I said, keeping my tone steady. "I'm sure you will," he replied, a hint of finality in his voice. "We just want the day to be perfect." And then he was gone, leaving only the quiet hum of the apartment and the faint ticking of the watch. I stood there for a long moment, ribbon still in hand, the joy of wrapping the gift dimmed by his veiled warning. But before the heaviness could take root, the front door buzzer startled me. I recognized the voice over the intercom, Janice, one of my neighbors, reminding me I'd promised to bring down some spare linens for the church charity drive. It felt good to have something simple to do. I bundled the linens into a bag and stepped out into the bright afternoon. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh bread from the bakery on the corner. My route took me past Bella Luna Cafe, my second home for 25 years. I wasn't on shift today, but the sight of the burgundy awning and the familiar gleam of the front windows drew me in. Inside, the lunchtime rush was in full swing. Clinking cutlery, murmured conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine. I waved at Jenna behind the counter and was about to slip into the back to drop off some supplies when I heard a voice call my name. "Margaret Hayes?" I turned, and there he was, Mr. Everett, a customer I hadn't seen in years. He was older now, his hair fully white, but his eyes lit up with recognition. I knew it was you, he said, a smile breaking across his face. You probably don't remember me, but I used to come here every Thursday for lunch. You always recommended the clam chowder. I remember, I said, genuinely smiling. You always asked for extra crackers. He chuckled, but then his expression softened. You know, I recognized you long before that, from the television. My late wife loved your show, Harbor Lights. We never missed an episode. You had such presence. You still do. A strange warmth spread through me, part pride, part ache. That was a long time ago, I said gently. Some things don't fade, he replied. It's good to see you, Margaret. We chatted for a few more minutes about the neighborhood, the changes over the years, before he was called back to his table. As I walked toward the back, the sound of his words lingered. You still do. In the small staff room, I set the linens down and sat for a moment on the worn wooden bench. The truth was, hearing someone remember that part of me felt like uncovering a hidden photograph in a forgotten drawer. Unexpected and a little bittersweet. I had chosen to keep that chapter of my life quiet, especially around Lily. She knew I had acted, but not the scope of it. Not the nights of applause or the offers I'd turned down to be home when she was sick. As I left the cafe, the city felt sharper somehow. The honk of cars, the shuffle of footsteps, the bite of the wind on my cheeks. I passed a bridal shop window, its mannequins draped in ivory and lace, and thought of Lily in her gown. The image brought a swell of pride that was quickly chased by Nathan's voice echoing in my head. Dress appropriately. I pulled my coat tighter and walked on, reminding myself that no one could measure my worth by the cut of my clothes. The watch, still unwrapped on my kitchen table, was proof enough of what truly mattered. It had ticked through harder days than this, and so had I. Back home, I set the gift box back in its place. Tomorrow, I told myself, I'd finish wrapping it. For now, I needed a quiet evening, a good book, and the steady comfort of knowing that no matter what was said or unsaid, I was Lily's mother. And that was the role I had played to perfection. The Collins estate loomed ahead like something from a magazine spread, perfectly trimmed hedges, marble steps that gleamed even in the fading light, and a front door that seemed to belong in a cathedral rather than a home. I clutched the gift box to my chest as I climbed those steps, my breath catching, not from the incline, but from the feeling that I didn't quite belong in this world of polished excess. Lily answered the door, radiant even in a simple blouse and skirt, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears. "Mom, you made it," she said, hugging me quickly before glancing over her shoulder. "We're just about to sit down." Inside, the dining room stretched out like a scene from a film. Long table draped in crisp linen, crystal glasses catching the glow from a chandelier that must have cost more than my car. Nathan was already at the head of the table, a glass of wine in hand, flanked by his parents and a few of his colleagues. As I took my seat near the middle, I noticed the way Nathan's eyes flicked over my outfit. Navy slacks, cream blouse, a cardigan I'd chosen for its warmth rather than its style. It wasn't unkind exactly, but it was the same look casting directors used when they'd already decided you weren't what they were looking for. Dinner began with polite conversation, the wine's vintage, the menu for the wedding reception, the high-value guest list. I smiled and nodded, offering small comments where I could. Then Nathan set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, his tone taking on a formality that made my stomach tighten. "Margaret," he began, "there's something I think we should discuss before Saturday." Lily's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Nathan." He held up a hand. "I want everything about this wedding to reflect the best of who we are, our values, our connections, our future. Many of our guests are influential, political figures, business leaders, people who are accustomed to a certain standard." I felt the air thicken, and his eyes met mine, calm but cold. "I'm concerned that you might not feel comfortable in that environment. It's not a question of your worth as a person. It's about maintaining the image we've worked to build." "Image?" The word came out sharper than I intended. He nodded as though he were explaining something logical to a child. Perception matters. It's the currency in which we operate. If even one guest is distracted, wondering why... He stopped, but I could hear the rest in the silence. Why she's here. Lily's face flushed. Nathan, that's my mother you're talking about. And I respect that, he replied smoothly. But we have to be practical. Sometimes we make sacrifices for the greater good. I set my napkin down slowly. So you're saying I shouldn't come to my own daughter's wedding? Nathan didn't flinch. I think it's best for everyone if you sit this one out. We'll make sure the photographer gets a beautiful portrait of you with Lily beforehand. Something private, away from the event. The room fell silent, the clink of cutlery replaced by the low hum of the chandelier. Across the table, one of Nathan's colleagues stared down at his plate, clearly uncomfortable. You're making a mistake, Lily said, her voice trembling. My mother belongs there. Lily, he said, lowering his tone as if to soften the blow. I'm trying to protect you from any awkwardness. This is about ensuring the day is perfect. I stared at the gift box in front of me. For weeks, I had imagined placing it in Lily's hands at the reception, watching her open it under that golden light. Now, the thought of being shut out of that moment felt like a physical blow. I forced myself to breathe evenly. If that's what you want, Nathan, then I won't come. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Mom! I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. It's all right, sweetheart. This is your day. I don't want anything to spoil it. Nathan smiled faintly, as if relieved. I knew you'd understand. But he was wrong. I didn't understand. Not really. I only knew that the years I'd spent working double shifts, skipping vacations, saving every spare dollar for her education and future, had just been dismissed with the same ease one might brush away a crumb from a tablecloth. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I heard laughter, the clink of wine glasses, but it all sounded far away. My thoughts were fixed on the steady tick of the pocket watch inside the box, a reminder that time doesn't stop for hurt feelings, or for those who try to erase you. When dessert was served, I excused myself, claiming an early morning shift at the cafe. Lily followed me to the foyer, her eyes searching mine. Mom, I'll fix this. He's being ridiculous. I kissed her forehead. Don't worry about me. Just focus on being happy. But as I stepped out into the night, the cold air biting at my cheeks, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The front door was only a few steps away when Nathan's voice followed me through the hush of the foyer. Margaret, one more thing. I stopped, hand on the doorknob, and turned slowly. He was standing just beyond the warm spill of light from the dining room, his shadow cutting across the marble floor. The faint murmur of conversation drifted from behind him, but here, it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. That gift you brought, he said, nodding toward the box I still clutched, the gold watch. My fingers tightened around it instinctively. It's for Lily. It belonged to my father. Yes, I understand, Nathan replied, his tone polite enough to mask the steel underneath. But perhaps it's not the right time for something so sentimental. She has enough to think about without being burdened by complicated reminders from the past. Burdened? The word burned in my throat. He took a step closer, his expression calm, almost sympathetic. It's just, she's starting a new life, Margaret. Sometimes it's best to let go of old symbols so she can fully embrace what's ahead. I searched his face, looking for some hint of kindness, but found only the calculated assurance of a man who believed he was protecting his territory. It's not a symbol, I said quietly. It's family. It's history. That may be true for you, Nathan said, lowering his voice, but to her guests, it's just an antique from another life. Leave it with me. I'll make sure it's stored safely. A faint chill spread through me. No, I said. It's meant to be given by my hands. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. His eyes hardened, and his next words were quieter still. "Margaret, I'm trying to make this easy. If you push back, I'll have no choice but to bring Lily into it in a way that won't be comfortable for her. She's under a lot of pressure already. I don't think you want to add to it." The implication landed heavy and cold, and he wasn't just asking me to step aside, he was warning me that my presence could become a source of shame for my own daughter. From the dining room, Lily appeared in the doorway, her gaze flicking between us. "Everything okay?" I waited for her to read the tension in the air, to demand to know what Nathan had said. Instead, she offered a small, uncertain smile. "Nathan's right, Mom. Maybe it's better to give the watch another time." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I had imagined her defending me, pushing back against the edges Nathan kept trying to draw around me. Instead, she stood on his side of the line, even if only out of exhaustion. My mouth felt dry. "If that's what you want, Lily." She hesitated, but didn't move closer. "I just want everything to go smoothly." I nodded, though the motion felt mechanical. Slowly, I set the box on the foyer table, the polished wood reflecting its golden gleam. The sound it made as it touched down was small but final, like the click of a lock. Nathan stepped forward, his smile returning as if the conversation had never happened. "Thank you. I know this isn't easy." No, it wasn't. It was the opposite of easy. It was like being erased in real time, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the outline of the person you once were. "I'll see myself out," I said. Nathan opened the door for me, his posture relaxed, almost gracious, but his eyes, those stayed sharp, measuring whether I might still cause trouble. The night air hit me like a plunge into icy water. I walked down the steps slowly, aware of the faint hum of voices from the dining room, the clink of glassware, the laughter that had continued without me. Halfway down the driveway, I stopped. I could still see the glow of the foyer through the tall windows, the box sitting on the table where I'd left it. A lifetime of work, sacrifice, and love contained in something small enough to be dismissed. I had been told in the span of one evening that I didn't belong at my own daughter's wedding, that the one thing I'd set aside for her, carefully preserved through decades, wasn't worth placing in her hands, and worse still, I had watched her accept it without protest. By the time I reached the street, my chest ached with a heaviness that had nothing to do with the cold. I wanted to be angry at her, but I couldn't. Nathan was skilled, too skilled, at twisting moments until resistance felt like selfishness. I walked home slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last, carrying not the gift I had brought, but the bitter knowledge that I had just been maneuvered out of both the wedding and the one piece of family history I had left. And yet, beneath the ache, a spark remained. Small, quiet, but alive. Because no matter what Nathan thought, I wasn't done yet. The apartment door closed behind me with a soft click, sealing me inside the quiet I knew too well. My small living room greeted me with its familiar clutter. Books stacked beside the armchair, a plant that had stubbornly survived my inconsistent care. The faint smell of coffee lingering from the morning. It should have felt like home. But tonight, it felt more like a waiting room where nothing ever really happened. I set my bag down and crossed to the bookshelf, where a row of framed photographs stood like silent witnesses. Lily at 5 years old, missing her front teeth, but beaming as she held up the crooked clay mug she'd made for Mother's Day. Lily at 12, holding the ribbon from her first school play. Lily at 22, cap and gown, sunlight catching her hair. My fingers lingered on the glass, tracing the edges of her face in each frozen moment. They were snapshots of a life we had built together, piece by piece, through years of early mornings and late nights, of scraping by but making it work. And now, those moments felt like they belonged to someone else, a woman who hadn't yet been told she wasn't welcome. The kitchen light buzzed faintly as I made myself tea. I didn't bother turning on the television. The noise would feel too false against the silence. I carried the mug to the couch and sat with my legs tucked under me, the heat seeping into my hands but not warming me. My eyes kept drifting toward the spot on the shelf where the watch should have been, if I hadn't left it behind. I could picture it perfectly, the way the gold caught the light, the gentle weight of it in my palm, the tick-tick that had once been my father's heartbeat in the quiet of a Sunday afternoon. Now it was sitting on Nathan's foyer table, stripped of the meaning it had carried through generations, and no one, not Lily, not even me, had fought for it to stay where it belonged. The phone sat dark on the coffee table. No missed calls, no messages. I told myself Lily was busy, swept up in the pre-wedding whirlwind, that she'd call in the morning or the day after when things had settled, but a part of me, the part that had learned to read silences, knew better. It wasn't just that Nathan wanted me out of sight, it was that he was already succeeding in making my absence seem normal. The next morning, I rose before dawn out of habit. The cafe needed me for the breakfast shift, and the routine was a kind of shield. The streets were still damp from overnight rain as I walked the few blocks to work, the city just beginning to stir. The smell of fresh bread greeted me as I unlocked the front door, flipping on the lights that made the little space glow warm and welcoming. By 7, the tables were full of regulars, students hunched over laptops, retirees reading newspapers, a couple of early rising families with children in tow. I moved between them with practiced ease, pouring coffee, clearing plates, making polite conversation. "Morning, Margaret," Mr. Henderson said as I refilled his mug. "Cold one today." "Sure is," I replied with a small smile. On the surface, nothing had changed. I was still the woman who knew exactly how each customer liked their eggs, who could balance 3 plates in one hand, who kept the place humming. But inside, there was a hollow space where something steady used to be. At 10, during the lull between breakfast and lunch, I leaned against the counter, wiping it down more than necessary. Outside, the sky was clearing, the rain clouds giving way to pale winter sunlight. That's when I noticed the young woman at the corner table, watching me over the rim of her coffee cup. She looked familiar, though I couldn't place her. When I brought her the check, she smiled faintly. "You're very graceful," she said. "Like you've been doing this a long time." I nodded. 25 years. She hesitated, then added, "I could swear I've seen you before. Somewhere else." "Probably here," I said lightly, tucking the bill under the sugar jar. But for the rest of her visit, I felt her eyes on me, and something in my chest tightened. She wasn't the first person to look at me that way, like they were trying to match my face to a memory they couldn't quite name. By the end of my shift, the emptiness was back, heavier than before. I walked home through streets that blurred together, my body moving out of habit while my mind replayed the events of the night before. The watch, Lily's silence, Nathan's calculated words. Back in the apartment, the quiet wrapped around me again. I thought of calling Lily, but my hand stayed frozen over the phone. I didn't know what I'd say that wouldn't make things worse. So I sat on the couch, looking at those framed photographs, and let the tea in my hands go cold. By the time the streetlights flickered on outside, the apartment felt smaller, as if the walls had inched closer during the day. I sat in my armchair, staring at the row of framed photographs on the shelf. The smiling faces, the bright colors of birthdays and graduations, the little snapshots of a life once filled with certainty. Tonight, they felt like strangers staring back at me. Without really thinking about it, I rose and began taking them down one by one. The glass was cool under my fingertips. I set each frame on the coffee table in a neat line, their cheerful expressions looking more out of place with every passing second. My gaze drifted to the wooden box on the bottom shelf, the one where I kept the smaller mementos, ticket stubs, postcards, bits and pieces that didn't make it into frames. I pulled it out and set it beside the photographs. One by one, I opened the frames, sliding the photos free. The plan, if you could call it that, was to put everything in a bag and carry it to the dumpster. Clean break. No more reminders of a life I was no longer welcome in. The first picture was of Lily in a pumpkin costume, her cheeks round with baby fat. The second, her high school graduation, my hand on her shoulder. In each, she was smiling toward the camera, and in each, I saw myself standing just off to the side, holding her up in ways no one else could see. I kept going until the table was a mosaic of her life, our life, spread out in silent testimony. Then I opened the box. Inside was a jumble of folded papers, old receipts, a cracked snow globe she'd given me in 3rd grade. I lifted it out, the glitter inside swirling sluggishly. Beneath it, something caught my eye. A small envelope with Lily's handwriting, the rounded letters of a child just learning to control the pen. On the front, in uneven blue ink, for Mom, so you never forget. I slid the paper out carefully. It was a letter, written on lined school paper with the date scrawled in the corner. Dear Mom, when I grow up, I want you to be with me forever. Even when I'm big and have my own house, I want you to visit all the time. You're my best friend. I love you more than all the stars. The words were simple, the spelling imperfect, but the sincerity was so strong it felt like a physical touch. My hands trembled as I read it again, then again, the letters blurring. The bag for the dumpster stayed empty. Slowly, I returned each photo to its frame, each memento to its place. The thought of erasing those moments now felt like betraying the little girl who had written that letter, who had once wanted me in every corner of her life. The next morning at the cafe, I moved through the breakfast rush with a little more steadiness. The letter was folded neatly in my apron pocket, a small anchor I could touch when the emptiness threatened to return. Around mid-morning, Jamie, the youngest of the waitstaff, was clearing a nearby table when she paused, holding her phone. She kept glancing between the screen and me. "Hey, Margaret," she said finally, curiosity bright in her tone. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, stacking plates. "Were you ever an actress, like on TV or in movies?" The question hit harder than I expected. My pause must have been enough to confirm it because she lit up. "I knew it! I was watching this old rerun last night, and there was this woman, looked just like you, only younger. Same eyes, same voice. I Googled her and—" "Jamie," I interrupted gently, "that was a long time ago." She grinned. "But it's so cool. I was thinking, if I posted about it, you'd go viral in, like, a day. People love that kind of story. Famous actress now working at a cafe. You could totally—" "No." My voice was sharper than I meant, and her smile faltered. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I just thought—" "I know." I softened my tone. "But my life now, it's not about that. Please don't post anything." Jamie nodded, slipping her phone back into her pocket, though her curiosity still flickered in her eyes. "Okay, I won't." She kept her word, but for the rest of the shift, I could feel the unspoken questions hanging between us. Back home that evening, I took the letter from my apron and set it on the shelf where I'd see it every day. Its paper was creased and worn, but the ink still shone bright, defying time. It reminded me of something important. No matter how much Nathan tried to push me out, there was a version of Lily who had wanted me close, always. That version still existed somewhere inside her. The thought lifted me, just enough to make the quiet of the apartment feel less like absence and more like waiting. The next morning began like any other. Gray light spilling into the apartment, the faint rumble of buses starting their routes outside. I brewed my coffee slowly, letting the smell fill the kitchen, then carried the mug to the window. From here, I could see Mrs. Callahan across the courtyard, her curtains always drawn open before the sun was fully up. She'd been my neighbor for nearly 20 years, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a voice that could cut through brick walls. At 83, she still walked to the market twice a week, always returning with a loaf of bread tucked under her arm like a prized trophy. That afternoon, as I was heading back from the cafe, I saw her struggling with a bag of groceries at the base of the stairs. I hurried over. "Here, let me help you," I said, taking the heavier bag from her hand. "You're a lifesaver," she replied, following me up the steps. "These stairs get steeper every year." Inside her apartment, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. She waved me toward the kitchen table, cluttered with knitting yarn, half-finished crossword puzzles, and a plate of oatmeal cookies. "Sit, sit," she insisted, pushing the plate toward me. "You look like you could use something sweet." I took a cookie, the warmth of it surprising. "Thanks. Been a long week." She studied me over the rim of her teacup. "You've been carrying something heavy. I can see it in your shoulders." I hesitated. Mrs. Callahan had a way of seeing straight through pretense, but I wasn't sure I was ready to spill the mess of the last few days. Still, the words came out before I could stop them. "My daughter's getting married," I began, "and her fiancé doesn't think I should be there, says I don't fit in." Her eyes narrowed. Fit in with what? His overinflated sense of himself? I smiled faintly, but it faded quickly. He made it clear, I'm not welcome. And Lily, she didn't fight him on it. Mrs. Callahan leaned back in her chair, letting the silence stretch. "And you believe that means your worth has changed?" I stared at the cookie in my hand, crumbs gathering on the table. "It feels like it." She shook her head slowly. "Child, I've seen more years than you, and I can tell you this. People will measure you by whatever ruler suits them. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's status. But those rulers are flimsy things. They snap the moment life gets hard." I looked up, meeting her steady gaze. "You know what lasts," she continued. "What you've done, what you've given. I've watched you raise that girl on your own, working long hours, never complaining loud enough for the world to hear. That's worth more than any seat at some pretentious wedding table." The words landed in a place I hadn't realized was still raw. It's hard to believe that right now. She reached across the table, her thin fingers surprisingly strong as they closed over mine. "Margaret, your value isn't a gift someone else can give or take away. It's in you, baked in from the moment you decided who you were going to be. That young man doesn't see it. That's his blindness, not your failure." Her voice softened, but it lost none of its conviction. "I buried my husband 30 years ago, raised my boys with nothing but a sewing machine and a will that could outlast stone. There were plenty who looked down on me. But you know what? I kept my head high. And when my boys graduated college, I didn't see those people in the crowd. They were too busy choking on their own pride." A smile tugged at my mouth, small but genuine. She released my hand and leaned back. "Don't you dare let someone else write your worth on a scrap of paper and expect you to read it as gospel. You're more than that. You've always been more than that." I left her apartment with the grocery bag in one hand and a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in days. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. For the first time since Nathan's phone call, I felt something loosen inside me. Not quite hope, but the shape of it. Back in my apartment, I set the groceries on my counter and poured myself another coffee. I stood by the window again, looking across at Mrs. Callahan's curtains swaying gently. Her words echoed in my mind. "Your value isn't a gift someone else can give or take away." It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start. I might not be welcome in Nathan's carefully curated world, but that didn't mean I had to shrink in mine. That night, I didn't turn away from the photographs on the shelf. Instead, I sat and looked at them. Really looked. I saw the strength in my own face, the steady presence I'd been for Lily in every stage of her life. Mrs. Callahan was right. That didn't disappear just because one man decided it wasn't enough. The next afternoon, I was halfway through folding laundry when there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Callahan stood there, her cardigan buttoned crookedly, holding a small, carefully wrapped parcel. "I was going through my old things," she said, a strange little smile playing on her lips, "and I found something you should see." I stepped aside and she shuffled in, moving toward my kitchen table as if she'd been here 1,000 times before. She placed the parcel down with deliberate care, then untied the thin string and peeled away the yellowed paper. Beneath it was a photograph, 8 by 10, glossy, the kind you'd see in a fan's collection. The woman in the picture wore a fitted navy dress, her hair in loose waves, her eyes alight with the kind of confidence I hadn't felt in years. My own handwriting curled across the bottom in blue ink. To Eleanor, with love, Margaret Hayes. I stared at it, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You've had this all this time?" Mrs. Callahan, Eleanor, smiled softly. "I met you after a performance of Harbor Lights in '83. I was just a stage door fan, but you took the time to talk to me. I never forgot it, and I've kept this picture ever since. Thought you might need reminding that you were someone worth admiring long before all this mess." I traced the faded signature with my fingertip, a dozen memories stirring at once. The smell of stage makeup, the rustle of scripts, the applause that felt like sunlight. "It's strange," I murmured. "I barely remember the performance, but I remember the people I met after. Maybe that's what lasts." She reached over, resting a hand on mine. "It's who you are that lasts." I set the photo gently aside, its edges curling from years in a box. A small flicker of pride warmed me, quiet but insistent. That evening, after Eleanor left, I sat with a cup of tea and let my eyes wander over the newspaper spread out on the table. It was yesterday's issue. Mrs. Callahan always passed hers along once she'd finished the crossword. I was flipping past the lifestyle section when a headline caught my eye. "Local tech heir weds in televised ceremony at Riverview Estate." I froze. The grainy preview photo showed the familiar curve of the estate's driveway, white chairs lined up in precise rows, and just beneath the headline, "Ceremony to be broadcast live on Channel 7 at 4 p.m. My pulse quickened. This was Lily's wedding, not just an event for Nathan's curated guest list, but something that would be streamed to living rooms across the state. I leaned back, the possibilities spinning. If I couldn't be there in person, not as a guest, maybe there was another way. The thought rose like a stubborn spark, but with it came a knot of anxiety. Could I really show up, even in the shadows, knowing the cameras might sweep across the crowd? The memory of Nathan's voice, cold, deliberate, slid into my mind. "You don't belong there." But then came another voice, small but steady. Lily's, from the letter I kept near my bed. "I want you to be with me forever." My tea had gone cold by the time I admitted it to myself. I wasn't done. Not yet. I pulled out my old work planner, flipping to the back where I kept a few tucked-away notes and numbers. If the wedding was tomorrow, I had less than 24 hours to make a plan. The broadcast meant there would be reporters, camera crews, maybe even a catering team, larger than the estate's usual staff, and I still had my uniform. I stood, crossing to the closet where my neatly pressed black trousers and crisp white shirt hung, ready for another shift at the cafe. My hands brushed the fabric, and for the first time in days, I felt that armor-like steadiness return. I could blend in, disappear into the service, be close enough to see her walk down the aisle without anyone realizing, at least until it was too late to stop me. The thrill of the idea surged through me, tangled with worry. If Nathan saw me, it could cause a scene. If Lily saw me, well, that was the part I couldn't predict. I set the uniform on the bed and returned to the kitchen. The photograph from Eleanor still lay on the table, my younger self smiling out with unshakable poise. I met her gaze and thought, she wouldn't hide in the shadows. She'd find a way. The news clipping and the photograph lay side by side now, like pieces of a puzzle. Tomorrow's broadcast could be my bridge back to Lily, even if I had to cross it unseen. For the first time in weeks, I felt a current of anticipation. Not quite victory, not yet, but momentum, and that was enough to make me believe. The morning of the wedding dawned clear, the sky washed in pale gold. I stood by the window with my coffee, watching the city stir awake. In a few hours, Lily would be walking down an aisle lined with flowers, the cameras capturing her every step. I set my cup down and moved to the bed, where my uniform lay neatly folded. Black trousers, white shirt, black vest, the same attire I'd worn for decades in restaurants and banquet halls. It was simple, unremarkable, and that was exactly what I needed. The plan was straightforward. I'd arrive early, blend in with the catering crew, and stay in the background. I wasn't there to cause trouble or draw attention, just to see my daughter take her vows, even if from a distance. By 9 o'clock, I was in the cafe's staff entrance, where Antonio, the owner, was already unloading crates of glassware. His eyes flicked over my attire, and he gave me a small nod. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. I tightened the knot of my tie. "I just want to be there, that's all." He sighed, pulling a clipboard from under his arm. "The catering team for Riverview is short-staffed today. I made a call. You're on the roster, at least on paper. Just be careful. Nathan's the type to notice details." "I'll stay invisible," I promised. The drive to the estate felt longer than it was. I kept rehearsing the rules in my mind. Keep your head down, stay busy, don't meet Nathan's eyes. When we arrived, the grounds were already bustling. White chairs stretched in perfect rows across the lawn, ribbons fluttering in the breeze. A massive white canopy covered the reception area, where round tables gleamed with silverware and crystal glasses. The catering manager, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, handed me a tray of flutes to polish. "We're serving champagne as soon as guests start arriving," he said without looking up from his checklist. Perfect. Polishing glassware was a job that kept me busy but mobile, close enough to see without being too obvious. I worked in silence, my hands moving automatically. Decades of service had trained me to slip into the rhythm, wipe, inspect, place. Around me, staff hurried between the kitchen tent and the tables, adjusting centerpieces, setting folded napkins just so. From the corner of my eye, I spotted the media crew setting up near the ceremony arch. A sleek black camera crane swung slowly, testing its range over the aisle. I imagined how it would capture Lily's dress, the moment her smile broke across her face. My throat tightened. At 11, a small van pulled up, and out stepped Lily. She was in a silk robe, her hair pinned up in loose curls. Bridesmaids swirled around her, carrying garment bags and makeup cases. For a moment, I froze, terrified she might glance my way. But she was swept inside the estate, her laughter trailing behind her like music. I forced myself to keep working, though my hands shook faintly. Seeing her, even for that brief instant, made every risk feel worth it. By noon, guests began to trickle in. Men in tailored suits, women in dresses that caught the light with every movement. They greeted each other with air kisses and murmured compliments, the air buzzing with polite chatter. I kept my gaze down, offering champagne to those who reached for a glass, never lingering long enough for recognition. But beneath the calm surface, my senses were heightened. I could feel Nathan's presence before I saw him, an easy confidence in his stride, his arm draped over the shoulder of a man in an expensive navy suit. His eyes scanned the reception area, assessing, controlling. I turned away before his gaze could land on me, moving toward the far end of the lawn. From here, I had a clear view of the ceremony arch. The flowers, white roses and soft pink peonies, formed a frame that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. The aisle was scattered with petals, each step prepared for Lily's entrance. In the distance, I could hear the faint hum of the television crew's feed tests. A voice counted down through a headset, and the camera crane shifted again. This was real. In a matter of hours, the world, or at least a small slice of it, would see my daughter marry. I glanced down at my hands. The white gloves I wore were spotless, the tray balanced perfectly. On the surface, I was nothing but a server. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just surviving. I had a purpose again. One no one else needed to understand. The day moved like a tide, slow and steady on the surface, but with dangerous currents beneath. By early afternoon, the reception area was a living organism. Servers weaving through rows of tables, florists adjusting arrangements at the last minute, the sound crew testing microphones. I was polishing a final row of champagne flutes when the catering manager, Mr. Danner, called me over. His face was calm, but there was a certain stiffness in the way he held his clipboard. "Margaret," he said quietly, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening, "we may have a situation." A cold ripple traveled down my spine. "What kind of situation?" He hesitated, then leaned closer. "The groom came by 10 minutes ago, said you weren't supposed to be here, offered me a generous sum to send you home." My mouth went dry. "And what did you say?" "I told him I'd look into it," Danner replied. "But truth is..." His expression softened, and for the first time since I'd met him this morning, his voice carried a note of something warmer than professionalism. 15 years ago, I was working at a little Italian place downtown. You were a regular. Always sat in my section. I was struggling, broke, late on rent. One night, you tipped me enough to cover what I owed. You probably don't remember. I did remember, faintly. His nervous energy, the way his hands had trembled setting down plates. I'd known he was desperate, though he hadn't said a word. "I'm not sending you anywhere," Danner continued. "If anyone asks, you're here on my authority. Nathan doesn't need to know otherwise." The relief was almost dizzying. "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than I could express. "Just keep to the side during the ceremony," he warned. "And if Nathan comes around again, let me handle it." I nodded, forcing myself to return to my tasks, though my pulse still pounded. By 3 o'clock, the air was taut with anticipation. Guests were settling in their seats for the ceremony, and I was in the service tent behind the main lawn, lining up glasses of water for post-vow refreshments. The hum of conversation outside was a steady backdrop until a sharper voice cut through. "Is that Margaret Hayes?" I froze. The voice belonged to a man in a tailored charcoal suit, holding a cue card stack and wearing a discreet headset, the event's master of ceremonies. His eyes were wide with recognition, scanning my face like a puzzle piece that had just clicked into place. "I knew it," he said, lowering his voice. "I watched you on Harbor Lights every week when I was a kid. You were incredible." Panic threatened to rise. The last thing I needed was for my name to circulate backstage. "Please," I said, keeping my tone measured. "I'm just here working. No one needs to know anything else." He studied me for a moment, then gave a small conspiratorial smile. "Your secret's safe, but for what it's worth, it's an honor to meet you." His sincerity caught me off guard, warming a part of me that had been cold for a long time. "Thank you," I said softly. A stagehand called him to the mic check, and just like that, he was gone, leaving me in a fragile bubble of gratitude and nerves. The first notes of the processional music drifted from the speakers, and the ceremony began. I moved to the far corner of the reception area where I could peek through the draped opening toward the aisle. There she was, Lily, radiant in white, arm linked with her maid of honor. Her smile was steady, though I could see a faint tremor in her hands as she held her bouquet. Cameras followed her every step. Nathan stood at the altar, expression polished and unreadable. The officiant began, and the words blurred in my ears. All I could focus on was the soft rise and fall of Lily's shoulders as she breathed, the way her eyes shone when she glanced at the guests. I kept still, hidden in the shadows, but inside, my emotions seesawed violently. Relief at seeing her, fear of being discovered, pride so fierce it almost hurt. Halfway through the vows, movement at the side of the tent caught my attention. Nathan was speaking in low, clipped tones to a security guard pointing in my direction. My stomach dropped. Danner appeared out of nowhere, intercepting them. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the firm set of his jaw, the way he gestured toward the kitchen with an authority that left no room for argument. Nathan's lips pressed into a thin line, but eventually he turned back toward the ceremony. The guard followed. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and the applause was a rolling wave that seemed to shake the air. I stepped back, blending into the flow of staff preparing for the cocktail hour. Behind me, the MC reappeared, giving me the faintest nod before heading to the microphone to announce the reception. The look in his eyes told me he understood more than he was letting on, and that he intended to keep my presence a quiet act of rebellion against Nathan's control. As the guests spilled into the reception area, my role resumed. I moved among them with a tray of champagne, my posture impeccable, my smile practiced but real enough to pass. In that moment, the day's roller coaster of fear, hope, and gratitude settled into a single unshakable truth. I was here. Against Nathan's money, his disdain, his efforts to erase me, I had found my way in, and I wasn't leaving until I'd seen everything I came for. The reception shimmered with candlelight and the low hum of conversation. Guests clinked glasses, posed for photos, and leaned in for whispered gossip. I moved quietly among them, refilling champagne flutes, my gaze drifting often toward Lily at the head table. She looked radiant, though there was a trace of something in her eyes. Tiredness, perhaps, or unease. I had just turned toward the bar to fetch another tray when a voice rang out from the far side of the room. "Wait, hold on, isn't that—" Heads turned, eyes narrowing in my direction. A young man stood near the dessert station, phone in hand, pointing at the overhead television mounted above the bar. The screen, meant to display a looping montage of Lily and Nathan's engagement photos, had briefly switched to a local channel running a retrospective on classic television dramas. And there I was, 30 years younger, in full costume, delivering a line from Harbor Lights. The image was crisp, the sound unmistakable. A murmur rippled through the guests. "That's her," someone said. "Margaret Hayes. She was in all those shows in the 80s. I froze, tray in hand, as faces shifted from polite disinterest to astonishment. Phones appeared, fingers swiping rapidly. A woman in emerald satin whispered to her husband, "Golden Globe nomination, 1992. The murmurs swelled into a buzz. People craned their necks to compare the woman on screen to the server moving between tables. Despite the years and the lines carved by life, the resemblance was undeniable. I kept moving, head high, focusing on the simple mechanics of pouring champagne. But the room had changed. The polite wall between staff and guests was dissolving. From the head table, Lily's eyes locked onto the screen, then back to me. Confusion, dawning recognition, and something deeper, realization, passed across her face. Her breath caught, and in an instant she was on her feet. "Mom!" The words seemed to echo, though she hadn't shouted. The crowd parted as she crossed the floor in her wedding gown, veil trailing like a river of silk. She stopped in front of me, her hands trembling as they reached for mine. "Why didn't you tell me?" I swallowed hard. "Tonight isn't about me, Lily. It's about you." Her eyes filled, and before I could say more, she wrapped her arms around me. The scent of her hair, the warmth of her cheek against mine, every ache, every lonely night, every sacrifice seemed to dissolve in that embrace. Applause broke out, not the polite kind that fills silences, but something warmer, fuller. Guests stood, clinking glasses, smiling, not at the wealthy groom or the glittering centerpieces, but at the reunion unfolding before them. I felt Nathan's gaze before I saw him. He stood at the head table, pale, gripping the back of his chair. For once, his polished composure cracked. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he stepped forward. The applause faded into an expectant hush. Nathan stopped a pace away, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "Margaret, I owe you an apology." He turned toward the room. "I judged her by what she does now, without knowing, without caring about who she really is. That was wrong. She gave up her career, her fame for Lily, for the woman I was lucky enough to marry." The words seemed to cost him something, but they were steady. "I hope you can forgive me. I'd like to start over, as family." I searched his face. For the first time, there was no calculation in his eyes, only something that looked like regret. "Family," I said slowly, "isn't about appearances. It's about showing up, even when it's hard." Nathan nodded once. "Then I hope I can show up now." The crowd exhaled as if they'd been holding their breath. Lily's hand squeezed mine, anchoring me in the moment. Whatever came next, the truth was out. Not the truth about my old career, that was just a flicker on a television screen, but the truth about why I'd lived the life I had. So my daughter could stand here today strong and loved. For the first time that evening, I let myself smile. Small, real, and unshaken. The air in the room still shimmered from the applause when an older man in a tailored navy suit stepped forward from the crowd. His silver hair caught the light, and there was a calm authority in the way people instinctively made space for him. "I don't think many of you know this," he began, his voice resonant enough to silence the remaining whispers. "But I worked with Margaret Hayes 40 years ago. We were filming on location, in a scene that went terribly wrong. A faulty set piece collapsed, and she pulled a crew member out seconds before it would have crushed him, saved his life, and then she refused to take credit, said the story belonged to the film, not to her." A soft gasp moved through the guests. The man's gaze met mine with warmth. I never forgot that, and neither did the man she saved. He named his first child after her. The quiet swelled into something heavier than applause. Admiration, respect, a collective reappraisal of the woman standing in a server's uniform. I felt my cheeks warm, not from pride, but from the weight of being truly seen. From the corner of my eye, I caught Nathan's reaction. His polished mask wavered again, but this time his posture sagged under something deeper. Choice. He was surrounded by his peers, people whose opinions had been the cornerstone of his life, and they were looking at me with respect. The unspoken ultimatum hovered in the air: pretend this never happened, or acknowledge me as part of this family. Nathan's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might walk away, hide behind the glittering facade he'd built. Then he straightened, stepped toward the microphone, and cleared his throat. "I was wrong," he said simply, "not just in judgment, but in values. This woman isn't just Lily's mother. She's the kind of person I could spend a lifetime learning from. Margaret, if you'll have me as a son-in-law, I'd be honored." There it was. Not the polished, strategic apology of a man covering a mistake, but something unvarnished. I studied him for a long beat, then gave a small nod. "It's not about having you. It's about you showing up for her. Always." He dipped his head, accepting the terms without argument. The music shifted, the band striking the first notes of the father-daughter dance. But tonight, it was different. Lily turned to me with that same smile she'd worn in childhood when she'd begged me to join her in the living room dancing to scratchy old records. "Will you dance with me, Mom?" I hesitated, then took her hand. We stepped into the open floor, the crowd forming a loose circle. Nathan stood back, watching, perhaps realizing this was a moment no amount of wealth could buy. We moved slowly, the hem of her gown brushing over my shoes, her veil catching the soft light. I could feel her heartbeat through our clasped hands, steady and warm. Around us, the faces blurred into a gentle haze. There was only her in the music. When the song ended, the applause rose again, but I didn't linger in the spotlight. I kissed her cheek, whispered, "Be happy," and stepped away before the next song began. Nathan looked as if he might say something, but I shook my head lightly. "This is your night now." I returned my tray to the catering station, quietly removing my apron. Slipping through a side exit, I stepped into the cool night air. The muffled sounds of the celebration floated behind me, but I didn't look back. The street was quiet, the pavement glistening faintly under the street lamps. I walked to my car, the heels of my shoes clicking softly. For the first time in a long while, my chest felt light. I didn't need the rest of the evening. I'd had my moment, our moment. Somewhere inside, Lily was dancing into her new life, and she knew I had been there. That was enough. And as I slid behind the wheel, the faintest smile touched my lips. I had entered unseen, left without fanfare. But I had been present where it mattered. Not for the cameras, not for the guests, just for her.